Imagine investing in property and earning 40 to 50% more than the average rent. And with only a little bit more capital needed, but zero extra time required of you. With costs rising everywhere, plus less and less time available, it's key that we find smart ways to boost our rental income. So by the end of this video, I will share the strategy that I'm adopting for myself and clients, how to start, and the best way to make it work for you. But before we get into the strategy, we need to take a look back at how we even got here. You see, in 2022, things really changed. Inflation was rising rapidly around the world, and the UK was no different. Unfortunately, we had a new government that proposed too many radical policies. And whilst the main aim of the policies were to boost growth, their plan wasn't seen as credible, especially in the eyes of the financial market. And so the financial market reacted badly, causing interest rates to skyrocket. The knock-on effect was mortgage rates went from record lows to record highs, with mortgage costs starting to exceed rents. Typical buy-to-lets, especially in southern areas like London, started to actually make a loss. They effectively became financially unviable. Now, unfortunately, since then, rents have actually adjusted higher, mortgage rates have stabilized, although not back to record lows. But the demand for higher income from landlords and investors hasn't dissipated. In the last 4 to 5 years, especially since the pandemic, there's been two strategies that have grown in huge popularity. HMOs, i.e. houses of multiple occupancy, where you're renting a property room by room, and serviced accommodation, also known as short-term rentals, Airbnb, Booking.com, where you're renting a house by the night, by the week, effectively giving loads of flexibility to the guests. But whilst on paper, they generate substantially more income, there are some real key drawbacks that people I know and even myself have personally experienced. So for example, look at HMOs. The rise of energy price cap from Ofgem really led to a significantly higher running costs. Some bills going up by double, even triple. This alongside juggling the higher tenant turnover where, tenants are moving out regularly, in and out, and costs to fill the rooms, such as tenant fines and maintenance, really stack up. And that really has reduced the actual rental profit. And additionally, HMOs are increasingly competitive. I'll take, for example, the area that I live in personally, Derby. HMOs that used to be rented really quickly are taking far longer to rent, and in a lot of cases are sat empty. With more HMOs coming on the market is becoming very competitive with a lot more higher standards. So if your HMO isn't in a good location or being marketed at a really competitive price, vacancy rates start to jump. And with regards to short-term rentals, the government is seriously cracking down. Higher tax burdens alongside many local councils now either enacting or in the process of enacting change to the planning system, making it really hard to turn a property into a short-term rental. But the strategy I am using removes the need to deal with these issues. This strategy is really effective as it hits on one of the biggest benefits of buy-to-let property. Tenants stay long-term, 3 to 5 years, so there's a huge reduction in voids and costs. However, with a standard buy-to-let, you would expect an average of 7 to 8% annual return, or in areas we find for our clients, 10% plus. But the strategy I'm going to reveal makes getting a high return much more possible. This strategy entails renting to not just one household, but to multiple households. But no, it's not a HMO. It's finding freehold properties that have already been split into 2 or more flats. Downstairs is usually 1 flat, and upstairs would usually have 1 or more flats. Here's some additional advantages. There's no hassle dealing with planning permission, which can take 6 to 12 months plus, and there's no additional financial burden associated with paying for planning permission and construction costs. And you avoid the key problem, the stress of not being ripped off by cowboy builders. Phew. Now, here's where this strategy really takes off. In strategic up-and-coming areas like the Northeast where I invest, the price between a standard property and a freehold property with, say, 2 flats is only 10 to 20% higher, meaning only a marginal amount of extra capital is needed, especially when using financial leverage. In fact, if you were actually to buy a property, go through planning, and then go through construction, it will often cost more in time and money than simply investing in a ready-made multi-let property. Now let me share with you some real life examples to really show you how this strategy earns 40 to 50% more in income and with only a fractional amount more needed in capital. I'm going to talk through 2 separate examples. Example 1 is in one location in the Northeast where we invest with our clients and myself. It's a really good yielding area. So let's just go into it. So You're buying this property A for 70,000, property B is 85,000. So you'll see from the picture, the first property is just a nice standard buy to let, whilst property B is a block of flats or effectively a multi-let of 2 flats. The mortgage rates are going to be slightly different. So with a standard buy to let, you'll usually see it 0.5% to 1% lower in terms of mortgage rates. So that's where the difference in the interest come from. But this is where you see the big difference. Look, you've got rent of £600 for property A, whilst in multi-let, although individually each flat rents for less, when you add them together, the total rent is actually £875 per month. So the yield on property A is 9.6 and property B is 12.4%. Net income on property A, as you can see, is £269, whilst property B is £455 net. As I talked about before in terms of marginal capital difference, property A only needing £23,500 to invest, property B only slightly more at £26,300. And here's where you already see the difference. 13.7% return from property A, which is still really good return, but property B generates 20.8% return. For marginally more capital, you can see the real benefit of a multi-let property. And then let me show you another example, effectively property C and D. I'd say these properties in a better capital appreciation location, hence the reason why for the big price difference. But we're going to still see the key difference between buying a single buy-to-let and buying a multi-let. So property C, 140,000 as a purchase price, property D, 160,000. And as I mentioned before, these are real life examples from properties for our clients. Although property C is just a comparable of a property we found for a client who bought a multi-let, but property C is one of the comparables of the property being a single let. You can see slight difference in the mortgage rates. The rental income, net income for property C, 270. Property D, £511. Now let's see the capital difference needed. 42,000 for property C and property D, 48,000. For £6,000 extra in terms of capital investment, we're seeing nearly a double in return from 7.7% to 12.8%. Oh yeah, and by the way, if you want to get access to investment properties like this, that will generate 40% more in rental income, then just apply to join our Inner Circle Portfolio Builder by clicking the link in the description below. However, there's one thing that this strategy really relies upon, and my clients and I would lose a lot of money and time without it, taking years to recover. So check out this video where I share what it is so that you can make profitable property investments.